Good evening. Welcome to this week's edition of Roundtable Talk. Of course, all the talk this week, the last week, has been La Soufriere Volcano. To continue the talk, we have with us lead scientist at the La Soufriere Volcano, who is attached to the UWI Seismic Research Center, Professor Richard Robertson, and the N.E.M.O director, Miss Michelle Forbes. Welcome again. It's good to have you guys once more, but under some very special circumstances. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Good evening.
Hi, good evening, and thanks.
Professor, I want to start with you, and I want to go back to last week, Thursday, when the order to evacuate was given. Tell us, if you will, what were the circumstances that led you to decide that this was the time, this was the moment to call for that great move?
Right. I think it seems like many years ago that happened, doesn't it? The last week or so has been quite long. But essentially, I think we were fortunate in that the volcano gave some clear signals. And we happened to have amongst the team with us people who were able to recognize these, particularly Roderick Stewart, who is a volcano seismologist who's here assisting us from the N.E.M.O, who had seen, he's a very experienced seismologist, and he had seen certain signals. But essentially what happened, of course, we know the volcano was into this effusive activity. And that effusive activity generated certain specific signals, which we had gotten accustomed to. We spoke about those dome emplacement events, which clearly indicated that it was growing a dome. But then there were two occasions in which it changed. As people would recall, there was a VT, a volcanotectonic earthquake swarm. That was the first one, and there were some events that people actually felt. So that was the first indication that something was changing. And then it went back to its regular dome emplacement events. And then there was another VT earthquake swarm. And again, when you're monitoring these things, you look for changes, you look for patterns, and you look for changes in the pattern that are indicative of the system trying to do something else. We always knew that the material out there was sort of part of something else. Something must have been pushing it. Something below, we've always said, wanted to get to the surface. And there was also a question of whether it would and whether it would be gas-rich enough, sufficiently gas-rich. So the next signal then, which sort of led to the thing, was that it started to go into what we call tremor. Now, tremor in volcanoes is usually associated, there are clear signals that magma is on the move. So if we didn't know that from physically, we saw the dome coming out, that told us that something was pushing it, and indirectly told us that magma was on the move or trying to get out. Then the VT earthquake swarms, which are associated with breaking of rock and sort of fluid or magma pushing through rock, again, that was an indicator. And then we got into tremor. What that told us is that it had moved from pushing the dome out to now breaking through the dome and now moving. That's what the tremor sort of suggested, that it was moving. And then we got into, the final nail was that we got into banded tremor, which was tremor activity, which was occurring in discrete bands. So you had tremor and then break, tremor and then break, tremor and then break. And if you're a volcano seismologist who have been monitoring volcanoes, that's a classic sign that magma is on the move. And usually there is that's the last sign that's gonna get to the surface, basically. We knew that once you got to that stage, that we couldn't tell exactly when. There was no other indication. There was not going to be, we didn't expect there to be any other signal that it would get to the top. And since we didn't know what that getting to the top meant, in other words, we didn't know if it was gas rich or if it was just going to be more of the same. So we weren't sure, but the evidence suggested that if this thing was pushing this dome, this mass of rock for so long, and it hadn't stopped, the mass of magma, the mass of dome that was there hadn't stopped it from pushing, it suggested to us that it had enough gas in it. And if we know now having signals that this gas-rich magma was getting to the surface or close to the surface, then, the next thing we expected was an explosion. But so that's what sort of the tremor, with the earthquakes, the tremor and the banded tremor and banded tremor being something that says that the next thing you have is magma at the surface. The banded tremor was kind of the last thing. So we essentially told the government that we couldn't guarantee that within the next 24 to 48 hours that you would not have an explosion. And that to a large extent is what then led to the decision by the government to evacuate people. It was appropriate because it meant that you didn't know, since you didn't know when things were going to happen, you knew you had to move people. And of course, remember it was happening, it was getting close to sort of the end of the day. I think the feeling was that you didn't want something to happen during the night when people were there, and it then started, you then try to move people. That was the worst thing. So they thought that the best thing was to move them before, at least start moving before the night, and so that you'll be moving already in case something happens. Unfortunately for us, nothing happened during the night. And in the early morning, bang on schedule, Soufriere erupted. So, as I said, it was a matter of this volcano. I think we were very fortunate. The volcano gave clear indications, and we had the right people, sort of the right combination of people here who saw the signals, who identified them, and sort of we came to a certain conclusion that, and of course, we had the people that were listening that took the information we had and made decisions. So, I think we were fortunate. Volcanoes don't always operate like that. Sometimes they do totally different things. But I've been saying before, Soufriere has been giving us all kinds of signals. I mean, it's doing nasty things, but it's always telling us what it's going to do. We just have to listen, and we just have to see and respond, and we can minimize the impact it will have.
You were so precise. I mean, within less than 24 hours, Soufriere did what she had to do. From your
Yes.
experience and your observations, what are the similarities or the differences in respect of the 1979 volcano when compared to this current eruption?
Well, I think the similarities, let's start with the similarities, if there are any, is that certainly the first kind of explosion we saw was similar to the first kind of explosion that you had in Soufriere 79. It's what's called a, well, it's closer to what's called a volcanic explosion, which wasn't quite the classic volcanian, but it was one that went up really fast. That's quite similar to how it started. Also, the events that we have in N.E.M.O later on are also quite similar to Soufriere 79. How they're different? They're different in terms of the second set of explosions and that period that happened after the first one. Remember, after the second one, you had a third one that happened in the afternoon, and then it never really quite stopped. It kind of just kept on going. It had an explosion, and then it kept on venting. That is different. Soufriere 79 didn't have that extended period of essentially very energetic activity where it was pulverizing the rock so much that it was producing ash that was fine, and therefore, because it was so fine, it could push it up into the atmosphere very high, and therefore it means that the ash had the potential to get much further afield. In 79, you didn't have that. What happened is that the volcano didn't fragment, didn't break up the rock as much as fine, and therefore it didn't get as high in the air. And what happened often that it collapsed on itself, just like what is happening now, those kinds of explosions where it goes up pretty high, but it falls back down because it has bigger fragments, and it has less energy. So perhaps less gas in it, if you think of that. The picture on this slide is more of a classic, in this picture there is more of a classic volcanic explosion, rather than the ones that we had in the second and third explosion, and then successive ones after that are more closer to what's called a Plinian kind of eruption, where it essentially jets ash and steam for quite a few times. So we were looking at the records recently, and we could count at upwards of about 20 or 30 events, discrete events that went on over the couple of days in terms of since the eruption started. So that in that respect, it's different. And that, to be honest, that had us worried for a little bit, because we knew that Soufriere was capable of those kinds of eruptions, but it hadn't done, we didn't think it had done that for a long time. But we in doing this eruption, we have a large team that interact with us, both small team that I say, but also a team in Trinidad, and we also talk a lot to collaborators in the UK. And in discussing all of that, we realized that it wasn't that different from past eruptions in the sense that the 1902 eruption did have periods like that. So that sort of gave you a little bit more comfort that what we were seeing is something that was similar to historic periods, but not too much different, because we were worried that it might have been more prehistoric, which were large eruptions that we were into when we were into that very intense period.
So one of the features of the eruption so far has been that extremely heavy ash flow. To your memory, to your knowledge, has there been such a huge ash flow in any previous eruptions in St. Vincent?
Well, that's the thing. In terms of, not in historical times, but in terms of the geologic record, I think you can't live in St. Vincent if you don't do those yellow, you see those yellow cliffs at Connery? There's a lot of yellow deposits. I don't know what they call it, but they cliff, they fall away all the time. Those thick deposits that you see all over St. Vincent, in fact, you see them in the south, you see them in the north. Those are actually deposits from Soufriere, and those were Soufriere deposits. Well, they were a result of eruptions that happened probably sometime between 14,000 to 50,000 years ago. Those were deposits from what's called subplinian eruptions, where the volcano was just simply gushing ash and steam for quite a long time, sometimes for days. And in those eruptions, you will have a lot of ash produced, and the entire island would be doused with a substantial amount of ash. And it more or less, it almost made the country like a desert. If you think of what the volcano itself looks like now, or some parts of the northern part of the country, that would have been much worse, and that would have applied in the entire country when you had these subplinian eruptions. And as I said, at one point during the sequence that was playing out, we were really worried that it looked like it had gone to that kind of scale. But in checking the records and checking various other things, we realized that that's not the case. You have had similar periods of past eruptions. We think there were times in the 1718 and the 1902 eruption when you had those intense periods of activities, just that it wasn't as well documented as we are obviously documenting it now. We are monitoring it closely, and we're looking at it closely. While in the past, in those historic eruptions, the volcano was monitored. So the documentation of that kind of activity is not really there. You kind of have to tease it out. So initially you think it was really similar to the prehistoric time, but then we realize now it's more similar to historic, which is, that kind of scale is sort of manageable. The scale of the prehistoric ones, which produce the yellow tufts, the yellow deposits, that would have been a problem for the country. Well, more of a problem than the ashes now. That is.
Okay, when we come back, we'll talk about the current status of the volcano, and we'll also bring in Ms. Michelle Forbes, who is heading a massive operation in terms of evacuation and managing that process. Back in just a moment.
Together on one scratch ticket can make your dreams come true. Yes, it's Fire and Dice. The new $10 scratch game with thousands of dollars to be won. Match your numbers with any of the winning numbers and win the prize shown up to $125,000. You can double or triple your prize with Fire and Dice. Available from all lotto agents and runners. There's cash to catch with just a scratch.
Hello and hi.
Hello everyone, I am Shakel Bob. I am a former Miss Pitani, a former Miss Rural SCG and Miss LCG contestant and runner-up. I'm a lawyer by profession but a pageant lover at heart. Do not let the negatives prey on your mind, because a stitch in time saves 9. So, it's COVID vaccination time. Get vaccinated today to reduce the impact of COVID-19 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
And I urge you, get vaccinated. It is safe and it is effective. Stop the spread, help the fight, and make the choice that is right. And let us unite and do the thing right.
Welcome back, Professor. Before I bring you back in, someone is asking if you can tell how many discrete explosions have been recorded thus far.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I actually, if you notice, when I was counting from a sheet of paper I had here because I knew that question was going to come up. We think there was at least 29 from the signals that we have, and a lot of them were earlier on. So we've had about 29 seismic signals that suggest that you had discrete explosions or ash venting events from this volcano since it started.
Okay. What's the current status of the volcano?
That's a quite busy volcano.
Okay, I don't know if Professor.
Yes, I did, Teresa. It seems that you're not hearing me, but I was saying that
Okay,
it
I'm
was
hearing
29
now.
events. Yeah, it was 29 events in total. And I was making the point is it was a very busy time, particularly in the early past. The last four, if you think of the last four, took like 2 days to happen. It means that the previous numbers happened. In fact, most of them happened within the first 3 days. In fact, when you were simply having sort of this almost a jetting of ash and steam into the atmosphere very vigorously. So it was quite busy from Friday towards Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It was quite busy, and then it reduced its rate over the past 2 days or so.
How is she behaving right now? I don't know if to say she or he, because I know there's been a little.
Well,
The
it's
guys
last, so
don't
it's
want
supposed
you
to be
to
she,
say
isn't
that,
it?
and so how is she behaving right now?
Well, I was going to say it's la, so I think the French means that it's supposed to be female.
There you go.
Right. So right now, as I said, volcanoes develop patterns, and we try to look for the patterns. And the pattern of activity now is one in which it does something, and then it produces these events that we call long period events, which are usually associated with a sort of a staccato kind of movement of magma. It's almost like it's in a chamber, and it's resonating. But the idea is that the long period events suggest that it's trying in Montserrat, for example, it's been associated with dome growth. So the idea is that there's magma down there. It doesn't have enough gas in it to sort of come straight out. So it's sort of moving in a sort of jerky kind of way, trying to get to the surface. And then what happens is that these long period events become more frequent. They actually get bigger, and then it goes into a period of tremor, which often is a signal. Well, there's a sort of a slow build-up, and then there's an impulsive. The size of the signal increase, and that size of signal is usually associated with a punching of some. There's an explosion at the summit, and it's either a very gas-rich plume or it's a plume that has ash in it. Now it has moved from having and the explosions are usually what we call volcanic explosions, which means that material goes up in the air, a plume is produced, and often you have pyroclastic flows associated with it because there's collapse of the material going in the air, and it goes on the mountainside as pyroclastic flows. So we've had at least I think at least 4 of them. We want to hopefully well, not hopefully, but we should be having another one sometime early tomorrow morning, and they are sort of they happen every probably 12 or 13 hours or so. So you have these events, these explosions, and then you have it being quiet, and then you have these long period events which become bigger, and then you go into another explosive event. So that's a pattern it has developed within the last 2 or 3 days or so. What that is telling us, what that's suggesting to us, is that that gas, which magma that came out, that then went gushing ash and steam for a long time, for a couple of days, has now gotten rid of a lot of its gas. It's not so rich in gas, and its gas and the production of gas and how easily it is to come out of the magma and to come up to the surface, that determines how fast or how powerful or how quickly the material comes up and whether it's explosive or not. So it's suggesting to us that it probably doesn't have as much gas, so therefore it's finding it harder to come out, and it's kind of solidifying at its upward end somewhere along, and therefore there's a potential that it will form a dome again. But sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it solidifies such that it becomes solid, and the top part of it that is trying to come out, so eventually it punches through. And when it punches through is when we have one of those events. Every 13 hours or so, give or take a few hours, it punches through. And each of those punches so far, for the last 4 that we've had, they become more or less a little bit weaker. So the first one was really big, and it produced all these pyroclastic flows that went towards the east. Larakai all the way down to Waterbury. Remember, we were saying that those valleys have been damaged, and pyroclastic flows have come down them. And then the last one that we had late, sort of early this morning, late last night. Well, no, early this morning, sorry. It was at 11:32 this morning. Was not as vigorous, and it looked more like it had some ash in it. It didn't produce any pyroclastic flows. So they marginally, they're decreasing in strength, and they're becoming weaker, which is telling us that it's having a hard time coming out. And we think that probably eventually they will stop. It wouldn't have enough gas to come out of you. You might have a dome forming, and there might be a period of quiescence when it's not doing very much in terms of activity. You probably wouldn't have any explosions. You probably would have some steaming going on. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's finished. We don't think it's necessarily going to finish like that. We don't think it's completely run out of steam. And we think that it's possible that another pulse of gas, which magma, might come through and might start the system going again. And we might go through a period of explosive activity interspersed with quiet periods before we totally end. We're not convinced that the magma that is down there have all come up. We're not sure how much it is, and we're not convinced it's completely up or that it's out and that it's run out of steam completely. So if and when it stops, I like to caution people to think that means that the eruption has ended. It will take a little while for us to be really sure it's ended. And therefore, we still need to remain on our guard. We still need to avoid and not go into the areas that are evacuated, and take protection, make sure that we minimize the impact of the ash in the areas that we occupied, which would be still safe apart from the ash impact.
Okay, I have a lot of questions for you, but I need to bring in Miss Michelle Forbes at this time.
Okay.
Michelle, you're probably heading one of the most, if not the most, maligned organization in this country. Since the eruption, you've had to evacuate quite a lot of people from the red zone, move them into the south. Tell us how that process has been going in terms of numbers. How many people have actually moved out, if we have that precise figure? And also, what have been the challenges of evacuation and managing the evacuation process?
That's quite a bit, Theresa. The evacuation process would have commenced just after, from the time we made the announcement last Thursday. And we were actually in a meeting on Thursday evening, when I got the call from Professor Robertson saying that, Michelle, I think this is it now, and we need to make, that decision. And I indicated right then to the Honorable Prime Minister that we need to evacuate our persons. So it began then. Since then we would have had quite a number of persons in shelters. Our count now is just about 4,000, and about the same to of persons who have been officially registered in private homes. We anticipate the persons who have registered in private homes or living outside of the public shelter environment to increase. For example, we just had a shelter open in Beckwith, 37 persons who went down to Beckwith.
In the Grenadines?
In the Grenadines. Okay. So we are seeing, the numbers. We figure that the numbers might be panning out by weekend in terms of the actual number of persons in shelter. But we anticipate that those numbers are going to rise in terms of the number of persons evacuated based on the figures that we know, the population data that we know for those communities, and what we are hearing on the ground of who is remaining or not remain or have left the various communities. One of the challenges has been, of course, persons did not evacuate, and it places additional pressure on emergency services in the fact that you did not evacuate when you should have. And I really want to encourage anyone who still is in that zone to please evacuate. The roads are going to be they're already difficult to even traverse. So that's what happened. The issue of there are several things that have happened over the last few days that have been even more challenging. The absence of the water has been one of the ongoing issues that plagues the emergency shelters and our private homes, because we are without water also. Because once the ash falls, once there's an explosive eruption and there's an ash fall, the systems have to be shut down. So it means that no water, and whatever you have had accumulated, if you're in a private homes, you have to use that over the day or two. And of course, in emergency shelters, we would recognize that if there's no running water, the tanks are empty, then it can be a challenge, and you can look at other health challenges later on. You have now persons actually calling in to register, but the lines are constantly busy because the mere fact that we have to take some time on the lines.
Someone was actually asking
on
about
the lines,
that.
And we have recognized also that we do not have enough lines for that. So we have actually set up 2 hotlines, and by tomorrow, hopefully, we will set up additional lines so people can actually hear voice and on the line. Our hotline is running 24 hours. It's still not enough, and we want to add additional lines so people can reach us. So those are some of the challenges that we're having. Of course, we know that many persons would have maybe not packed anything when they were evacuating. So that is a challenge. But of course, it is we're trying our best to reach those persons who have evacuated and need assistance.
Okay, so before we take our next break, somebody wants you to speak to the hotlines and the complaints about not being able to reach people and not getting callbacks from N.E.M.O. Person also want you to talk about efforts made to the private homes and those holding evacuees. And lastly, she says, can you address the mistrust with N.E.M.O and complaints about those in shelters not getting supplies? I'll give you some time, and when we come back, we'll talk about those 3 things. Back in a moment.
Band leader of Lynx Mass Band, Band of the Year winner 2019. I'm urging you to practice proper hand washing to curb the spread of COVID-19. When you're able to wash your hands, use soap and water to clean your hands thoroughly. Get vaccinated today. Protect yourself and be responsible.
Listen to me, and I urge you, get vaccinated. It is safe and it is effective. Stop the spread, help the fight, and make the choice that is right. And let us unite and do the thing right. Man and woman, let us join in the fight.
Fire and dice. together on one scratch ticket can make your dreams come true. Yes, it's Fire and Dice. The new $10 scratch game with thousands of dollars to be won. Match your numbers with any of the winning numbers and win the prize shown up to $125,000. You can double or triple your prize with Fire and Dice. Available from all lotto agents and runners. There's cash to catch with just a scratch.
Channel 114. Visitry. Channel 114.
Children are the future, help them read, learn, grow. Early reading is the key, so help them read, learn, grow. Let's show them how much fun it is to read, learn, grow. So parents, you play your part. First and foremost, reading from so young is advantageous. Link with the teachers, working hand in hand is a must. Just 10 minutes of your child reading to you is a plus. Get fun books, make reading priority. When children read, they are able to learn, and the more they learn, the more they grow. So parents help the kids read, learn, grow. Reading is fun, kids have to know. Read, learn, grow. The children are the future, help them read, learn, grow. So parents, you play your part.
This message is brought to you by the OECS USAID Early Learners Program, funded by United States Agency for International Development. For more information, log on to www.oecs.org/ELP.
Welcome back. Michelle, I gave you a series of questions before we took the break, but I must read this one. Make sure to get your rest, Ms. Forbes, and take care of yourself. Also, you are human and the whole situation is extremely challenging. Remember, you are not alone. It is a whole organization. Delegate too. So there you have some words of encouragement. I also want to address the person who's concerned about the fact that we are not wearing masks. Well, we are socially distancing to begin with. And yes, we are vaccinated as well. So go right ahead, Ms. Forbes, and respond to those.
We have several lines at N.E.M.O, but obviously this event it has exceeded the capacity of these particular lines that we have. We have our main telephone line, and we have an emergency line also, 458-6366. And we recognize that these lines are not enough. They're just simply not enough to handle the volume of calls that have been coming in. We have since then created a hotline, 526-3000. Our hotline 526-3000, and this is where if you want to ask questions and you're going to actually register persons, you can actually call on these lines. Effective in the morning, we will be having several lines that you can call if you want to make a donation. We'll have several numbers separate. We're just finalizing them tonight. You will have more lines if you want to call in and do any registration with evacuees. Well, I don't like to use the word evacuees. Any persons who have been displaced and actually staying with you, and any other concerns that you may have. So we are actually bumping this up so that persons can actually reach us and hear another voice at the end of the line, because we know it has been frustrating. The office has been flooded and we have not been able to let in persons as we would like because of the COVID-19 environment. So many persons have to stay on the outside. In terms of the credibility, I think one or two persons. I'm only hearing the accusations. There haven't been any facts in terms of factual evidence of if any person stealing or taking anything. What we must recognize too, that the same persons who are assisting at different places, they too may have been affected. We don't know, but certainly anybody within the N.E.M.O system, within our organization, and we must remember there are different entities that supporting the organization. So when we say N.E.M.O, it may not be Michelle Forbes or the staff, the 17 members of staff of N.E.M.O per se, but different persons who act on it. But any item that is given to N.E.M.O comes into the national system as part of a national relief, and it is broken down and distributed to the persons who need it. So I don't agree with necessarily the person saying that, you know, where the item's going, it's fraudulent and we're not giving the persons who need it, because we have been operating in environment, not at this magnitude, but we have had events over the years that we've been able to, whatever has been donated or whatever has been bought, because this event we have had to purchase quite a few things to really supply for the needs of our people.
Let's talk about supplies and also address the whole issue of, I know an announcement was made earlier this week, a couple of days ago, advising people who want to take food and so on to the shelters. N.E.M.O had said that they should at least inform N.E.M.O before they go to a specific shelter.
Definitely.
What's the rationale for that?
At least check in with us, because what is happening is that we find that several shelters are being inundated with donations, and while other shelters are not. You know, they have the supplies from us. So we ask you to check in, because what you see people keep donating, and that maybe we can actually guide you to another shelter or a family that may need assistance. So if you just check in with us, we'll say, okay, well, which day you want to take it, and we can actually map out the days. We have done that. We're doing that. Somebody asks, okay, can I feed a shelter for a day? And we check and we say, okay, yes, tomorrow is available. You know, so that you don't have that duplication of efforts. You're preparing lunch at the emergency shelter, and someone else turns up with lunches again, while another shelter could actually.
And I know that quite a lot of that has been happening.
While another shelter could have had that lunch. So you just have to check in with us. We okay if you want.
It's not that you're stopping anyone.
No, we're not stopping anybody, because you know people want to actually give to others. So just check in with us. We'll be able to guide you along. You know which areas you can assist. We having calls from the corporate sector, the private sector saying we want to adopt a shelter that have persons from a particular community, those kind of actions, and we welcome it, because we know we are all in this together. It's not just government alone. We have to we are all in this for the long haul. We don't know how long, but in terms of that whole corporate responsibility and being able to give back to the people. So we welcome this kind of support. We are not turning it away, but what is happening, a lot of persons want to do their own thing, and we cannot just allow it. Not just that, persons are just turning up to the shelters. We're in a COVID-19 environment. The person's privacy and security within that whole environment is paramount, and we have to ensure that is maintained. So we have added several restrictions, because for you not just be able to walk into the shelter like that, because we know that public health has to be on the ball and keep visiting those shelters from time to time, just to see, what is happening. So it's really twofold, precautionary, because in the current environment we're in, the security of the shelter, of the personnel in the shelter, the persons in the shelter, those persons who have been displaced by this eruption, and of course to avoid the repeat or the glut of items to one shelter where another may not be having.
And that's spoilage and wastage. So someone is saying, can Ms. Forbes speak directly to the international diaspora and state 5 of the most important items that the country needs so we can structure our relief efforts?
Several of the items we have had a needs list for the last week. After every event, we tend to generate our needs. So our needs change over a period of time. There's always still a need for water. if this eruption continues, we can see and the water system continue to be shut down. We may have some challenges there. I know CWS is doing an excellent job to try and really give us back as much water as possible. But anytime we have any ash fall, that presents its problems. We're looking for support for the families. We anticipate by the end of the week or early next week we should have all the cots and the mattresses that we need, especially to support those persons who are staying with private in private homes. So we need water jugs, for example, water bladders. Water bladders to really fill up water, especially for the shelters. So some of the needs that we have had are really being fulfilled. Initially, we had water tanks, but we think that we're going to reach that capacity of having enough water tanks by the end of the week. But I want to ask persons, so you don't not necessarily have to send items. And a person asks you for five items, but you can also donate cash. Cash to the cause in terms of having us allow to buy things on the market, because we have businesses on the market and we want to encourage that spending and actually that business on the market. So our first preference would be after this week goes into next week is for cash donation, not necessarily for the bulk goods, because there are several bodies that are actually donating items, and we don't want a glut on the market. We don't want the market be flooded, because we still have to have our local businesses to survive. So we are still looking for various things, hygiene items, towels, towels, hygiene items, toothbrush, toothpaste, and those kind of items. So those are some of it in a nutshell.
Somebody's asking about the needs of children.
The needs of children, definitely. The children are very much affected in this event, and with the various ministries are doing different initiatives to really get the children through the Return to Happiness initiative that is run by the Ministry of National Mobilization and Education. But the children need a little snacks, a little game, those kind of things to keep them occupied, because they may have left without them and need to be occupied in the emergency shelter. So those are some of the things that we can look at.
Okay. Someone is asking what's the plan for the 20 million from World Bank, but I think that they'll need to talk to the government about that plan. Certainly N.E.M.O would not be able to answer that question for you. Someone wants to know if water will be distributed to private homes, especially private homes that are housing people who have evacuated.
Once we have water, we distribute it generally, but water distribution falls with CWSA. But once we do have, we distribute it through communities. Actually, we partner with CWSA. We don't do it by ourselves, because we don't know which communities they may have reached. Once we are delivering to a family, we also try our best to include some water within that delivery. So, and we know we have more water coming in, and that is the biggest need. So that will also happen. So we have to work close with the CWSA, so we do not do our own thing, but also just complement what they were doing in the various communities.
Somebody saying there are families, some families that are suffering and need help too, not just in the shelters.
Well, we have had a rough year. I would say that we have had a rough year, and our Prime Minister has already indicated that he wants to assist several of these families. So the various agencies are working together to see, to ensure that this will be happening, maybe not in the first phase, but as we roll out as the week go along, to ensure that additional persons who may need help, other than those who have been displaced, can actually also receive that kind of help. And that's really in collaboration with the Ministry of National Mobilization.
What would you say is your most challenging issue that you see, or that you're actually dealing with at the moment?
I would say it's a bit of logistics and people understanding, having an understanding that there's a need out there, and maybe we need to act a little bit faster in certain instances. Until you have gone through it, and many of us may not go through it if we don't live in those particular zones, red and orange zone, and have had to evacuate. But I think understanding the system understanding how it's work, and understanding that we need to get things done right. We may not always get it right, but let's us work together as agencies, as arms of government, as the private sector, because people are suffering. People have been affected, and we have to recognize, put ourselves a little bit in their shoes, and recognize that the mechanism and the systems have to be adjusted and to modify to suit this environment. What we have recognized is that yes, we have a system, we have a structure, but to deal with this mammoth event, we have to make those changes to adjust so that we can satisfy
It's
the
not really
environment.
cast in stone.
It's
and
not cast in
concrete
stone.
when the reality really hits.
Right, it's not cast in stone, and we had something, so we now need to improve it as we realize that some things were really, really pressured and may not have worked.
Okay, we'll take our final break. Back in just a moment.
Fire and dice. Together on one scratch ticket can make your dreams come true. Yes, it's Fire and Dice. The new $10 scratch game with thousands of dollars to be won. Match your numbers with any of the winning numbers and win the prize shown up to $125,000. You can double or triple your prize with Fire and Dice. Available from all lotto agents and runners. There's cash to catch with just a scratch.
Erasmus Wiley Glasgow, and I'm feeling perfectly fine. I just had the vaccine, and I'm trying to encourage each and everyone to come and get the vaccine. It's important. Life goes on, but with this vaccine, it makes it even easier. Because of the field we are in, we are actually at the front. So each taxi driver should come and take this vaccine, because trust me, it will be important to each and every one of us going forward.
Do not procrastinate, but rather let us vaccinate.
Welcome back. Question: transparency and accountability are weighing heavy on the minds of people. How would N.E.M.O dispel that?
I, as an organization, and I've been there for some time, I don't think anybody has been more transparent and accountable for our actions. And as we have persons who have their belief that things should not become to N.E.M.O, or if they give something to N.E.M.O, it goes somewhere else, which I we find it difficult to believe that people would think that, because we know that we don't do that. I'm not saying that everybody is perfect. You may have one or two persons within the organization who does that, but others. So transparency and accountability, we have to account for every item that comes into N.E.M.O. We have to account. We have the checks and balance in terms of our sign-up sheets, who gets what, who doesn't get what. And even when we give something to a member of the public, it is recorded also, so you can actually see what comes in, see what goes out, and who it is given to. So this mistrust, if you want to put it that way, I'm not sure where it comes from, but persons, and I invite anyone, and I want to invite anyone who wants to actually see the process in operation to let me know. For you to really witness what goes on within the organization. We are there sometimes packing to 3 o'clock in the morning, doing things at all hours, sometimes no sleep, if you want to put it that way. We have team, the hotline, I understand person having challenge with the hotline. The hotline is going around to 24 hours. We have persons packing from the Ministry of National Mobilization 24 hours. Our guys are doing the logistics and the movement of the stuff, are doing these things till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then, resting and have different teams. So I invite you to come work with, to come with us.
Come and
Come
observe.
and observe, because we have nothing to hide. The process is clear. Sometimes I don't even see the stuff that come in. I know, because of course things may have to be ordered and I sign off on it. And I need to know where they're going, yes. But I will check back to see, well, okay, you know, what has been happening. So I really invite persons to observe the process, and I think as a government agency, we have to be accountable for every single dollar that we use, every single item that we use, and I will challenge anybody to really show where that deficiencies in terms of not being accountable within the organization.
Okay, somebody's asking, was there anything put in place to separate individuals that were supposed to be on quarantine in the red zone as part of the plan?
Yes, that has always been a part of the plan. It has been implemented in emergency shelters. Quarantined persons have been remain in quarantine, and even those who have been positive have been placed in separate facility also. So that has always been a plan. We had that in effect since June last year for the start of that hurricane season. So that has always been part of the plan from 2020 coming forward.
Okay, so quite a few people are also asking about donations. I don't know if the guys in the back have that information that was sent out with the bank account number, etc., where people can actually deposit monies for the relief efforts. Professor, we have not forgotten you.
I have the bank account
Someone
number.
wants to know, yeah, we'll come back to that. Someone wants to
That's
know
fine.
if there's a possibility that the red zone area, and I'm thinking over the dry river, if there's a
Yes.
possibility that it could become uninhabitable, as is the case in Plymouth, Montserrat.
It would require. Okay, the frank answer to that is, of course, volcanoes trash lots of places, and we have had that before. The 1979 eruption caused quite a significant amount of damage, and in 1902 would have caused even more. I suspect, well, at present, a lot of the damage that has happened in occupied areas, in the villages on the volcano, appear to be damage associated with ash and mud flows. So far, we haven't had any indication, well, we haven't had any evidence that any pyroclastic density currents have gone through any of the major villages, so that they're still largely intact. So yes, you could have a lot of damage. In terms of whether they are uninhabitable, the same thing wouldn't necessarily apply like in Montserrat and Plymouth. In Plymouth, one of the reasons you have it being as it is because of the duration of the activity. You had years in which the area could not be occupied, and therefore there was a lot of material deposited, and therefore there's a lot of burial. Soufriere doesn't erupt for that length of time, so that the chances of the material being deposited and therefore making the area totally, absolutely desolate is less so. In addition, so it means that, for example, long before you get to that stage where there's a lot of deposition, people would be able to go back and sort of start living and clean up things. In addition, we have always had some well-developed drainage systems that drain the land of debris, and a lot of it goes out to sea. Again, because of the nature of the landscape, you don't have any place in those villages for material to accumulate, to bury things. They will simply go off to sea. So it's not the same situation. It's possible in an absolute sense, but I don't think it's likely, because the eruption wouldn't go on that long for that kind of destruction to happen, or burial to happen, as you had in Plymouth.
And somebody wants to know whether or not it's growing a new dome.
We have no evidence of that because we simply we haven't seen into the crater. Although we do collaborate with people, with colleagues in the UK and the US, and have access to satellite imagery. I haven't seen the one for today, but as far as I'm aware, it hadn't up to yesterday. Because what is happening essentially is that it's, in a sense, it's trying to grow a dome. The signals indicate that it's trying to do that. But each time it almost gets there, it then has an explosion and destroys that effort. So we're into one of those periods where it again seems to be trying to, we'll have to see at the end of that, 13 or 14 hours that I was saying, whether it actually punches through again and does a lot of damage to that effort. I would say that the chances of, say, seeing a dome would increase if the duration of that interval that we're in now increases. If, for example, it goes from 13 to 14 and then it just doesn't come, the punch through doesn't come, then it means that the activity we're having, as I said, is indicative of it trying to grow a dome. And it therefore means that if it wasn't destroyed, that the chances of there being a dome growth is very high. But until we look into the crater and we have any physical evidence of that, all we could say is that the signals suggest that the signals that we have are associated with dome growth in other places. And we wouldn't be surprised if that's what it's trying to do. Whether or not it complete that process, we'll have to see.
Is the volcano expanding?
I don't think so. If anything, well, yes and no. Before, people know that there's a dome in there, and then it created another dome. What it's essentially done is that it's destroyed the two domes that existed before. So there's no a hole in there. So in a sense, it's reamed out a crater. In terms of whether the edifice itself is expanding, we never had any indication that it expanded, that there was any deformation outwards. I would be surprised though if maybe we didn't capture the definition before. Maybe it actually deformed before we put the instruments in. Remember, we only put in the GPS instruments earlier on this year, and it's possible that it had already swelled up in preparation for this eruption. Then if that's the case, then we would expect that all the activities going on, which is pushing stuff onto the surface, is going to mean that it's going to shrink a little bit. Now, don't think that you're going to be able to see this, right? This is changes in shape that are very, very small and can only be detected by special instruments that we put there to measure them. So it's possible that it's changed shape. It's more possible that it's shrunk rather than swell up. And you wouldn't be able to see it, or I wouldn't be able to see it. The instruments might tell it, and we'll know that as we continue to track. In fact, we might have some indication, we might have some results, some research results based on processing of the data that we've collected that would indicate whether it's shrunk or it's full, or what kind of change in shape that might have happened since this activity started.
Somebody's asking, what will be a sign that the volcano will become more destructive? And I also want to know what became
more
of
destructive.
the equipment
Okay.
and so on that were at the summit.
Oh, well, I suspect that the equipment that was there, the camera and all that gave us some. In fact, one of the final indications that the dome that the explosion was going to happen. This was after, in fact, the evacuation was already started. Was that the dome? I don't think people realize. Well, I don't think we've said that, but the dome itself that was there actually swelled up because stuff was coming through. But anyhow, I suspect the equipment that was there, the camera, everything, basically from evidence that we have, pyroclastic density currents that have come down those rims, those areas. So it would not be there simply. It's gone. It's pulverized. It's somewhere. It has now become some fragment of ash that is probably somewhere about the place in the world or something. Somewhere in a pyroclastic density current, somewhere in the ocean, something. But it's gone. I wouldn't expect to see that. There is a station that is on the flank of the volcano, close to the summit, though. And that went out about 2 or 3 days ago. Well, it went out soon after the initial period when you had all that jetting of ash. Now, we think it actually stopped working because the solar panels which powered it actually got buried and covered in ash. Not buried, but covered in ash, which means that when the battery power ran out, it wasn't able to recharge. So the station doesn't have any power. We think it might actually still be there. But the recent activity that we have seen that pyroclastic flows have gone down the valley on the right side and the valley on the left side, and the station is in the middle. So, we're not quite sure that it will survive. If any more pyroclastic flows go down those valleys, essentially what's going to happen is that the deposits of the pyroclastic flow get to sort of affect the station eventually, and I suspect the station is going to get destroyed. So I'm not sure if some of this is gone, and I suspect it's going to destroy more before we finish.
Okay. So I'll bring you in for the final question, but there's somebody who seems to be quite irate here, N.E.M.O, this is for you as usual. You're used to being beaten up. I would like you to open up this conversation to the people of St. Vincent to be able to call and share what they're going through. People have been calling, no one is answering. St. Vincent need a free press, not two people at a table telling what they want, and there's no one to verify or question it. The money, food is for, as you say, the public. Give it to them. What about people who are unable to get to register with N.E.M.O? N.E.M.O should go to the people. There's millions of dollars pouring in at this time. So do not sit in your designated offices. Go to the people. That's the last thing I'm going to throw on you today, if you care to respond.
Well, we have quite a bit of people working it, and when you say N.E.M.O, I just want you to remember it's just not the staff at the Secretariat. N.E.M.O is all the agencies of government doing various things, and we're out and about. What we are doing now, because we recognize that some persons may not be calling into the organization we are setting up, we are actually working now in the community structure, having different persons and different key persons in the community who will be able, who actually have been supporting this process, and even the persons from the communities who have been evacuated, they know where those persons are too. So they're feeding in that information. Say, okay, you can find Jane in this community, she's staying with XYZ. So that information is now coming in. It's difficult sometimes to know exactly where people are, so we have to depend on the community members to feed that in. So we are looking at we are putting in place now the different things, different groups, not the different groups already in the community, but different support systems within the community, the leaders, through the various ministries, volunteers, etc., who's actually capturing that information for us so we can actually get that information. And bearing in mind, we are working 24 hours. We have been working 24 hours. We do not close. We are there 24 hours. The Emergency Operations Center has to be running 24 hours and to be manned at all times. So it takes all of us to work in this, and different agencies are responsible for different things, but we also have to ensure that we follow through on what is happening, and we designate, we delegate, persons have their responsibilities, but we'll try our best, of course, we are going to improve the telephone system by tomorrow. We understand the hotline gives some trouble from time to time, but definitely recognize, and we're hearing what people are saying, and we will be able to reach us on the end of the line tomorrow. We're bringing in new persons, additional persons. We have been working 24 hours, and we continue to improve things as we go along.
Okay, and I have to correct this one because I'm seeing somebody saying here that N.E.M.O must allow people to clear their barrels. N.E.M.O does not clear barrels. You get your personal barrels and you clear it
for yourself,
as you are accustomed to doing. So please, somebody wants to know if you have considered doing the registration process online as well?
Yes, we have, yes, and we actually have considered that, and actually that's being done by the ITSD now to support.
So that is being worked on?
Yeah, that's being worked on.
Okay. All right. Professor, somebody wants to know, when is it likely that you'll be able to fly over and get us some pictures? And I want to conclude by asking you, when is this volcano likely to go to sleep?
Yeah, well, Teresa expected that question from earlier on, so. Okay, in terms of flyover, it depends, because the overflight for the volcano is not really only related to whether aircraft is available. It's also related to the volcano. As we know, planes don't like flying in ash, and when you have an ashy mountain like that, you have to probably get something like a helicopter, and then you have to have a particular kind of helicopter. I believe something is being worked on currently, because we would like to see in, of course. But that said, we are indirectly seeing it. It's just that we're not seeing it with the regular photographs that you see. We do collaborate with various people at the IPGP, at the USGS, at N.E.M.O. There's a whole grouping of satellite remote sensing experts who look at satellites all the time, task them to look at the volcano and give us interpretations and give us information on it constantly. The public don't necessarily see all of that, but we do get access to that data. So it's not like it's something that's completely, the fact that we don't have a helicopter here, we don't have drones going up and looking at the picture, it doesn't mean that we're totally blind. So our analysis of what we've seen in the drums to a certain extent is validated by what the satellite data is saying. So coming to your more important question, when will it end? Somebody asked that question the other day to me, in fact today, and I was telling them that if I could say that, yeah, that would be amazing, because we would have given a reasonable estimate of when it began. If we could say when it is end, yeah, I think you'd be calling the seismic team some, I don't know, you'll have to find some different words for how good we are at predicting things. But seriously, it's going to be similar to how, I see you have a photograph, the satellite photograph of how it looks. It has a hole in the middle now. But yeah, I digress. It's going to be a matter of monitoring, continuing to monitoring and looking at what the data says. Just as we did when it started, we didn't have the network we needed, and we put in the network we needed, and the network started to show signals. And the signals we interpret to be A, and then the signals change, and it's interpreted to be A plus B, and then it change again. And that's how we do it. We collect data, we interpret the data. And that is how we would know when it ends. So I wouldn't be able to tell you, no, it's going to end next week, tomorrow, or the next day. But I could give you some ballpark figures. So I will tell you, for example, that I will be surprised if it ends next week. But if you ask me if it's going to end next month, I probably will say, well, maybe the chances are greater. If you ask me if it's going to end in the next 3 months, the chances are even greater. If you ask me if it's going to end in 6 years, I will tell you, yes, of course it's going to end. If you're going to ask me. So you understand, it's clear that given how Soufriere erupts, it's not going to go on for years and years, like, for example, months. Right? It's not showing that. It's not showing us what it's doing, that it's capable of, or it wants to do that. We think it's going to be something that is going to run its steam and end. In the most likely scenario, it's probably going to be more in terms of months rather than years. But certainly we'll be surprised if it's in terms of probably just a week or two. It's probably going to go on for longer than that. Whether we like it or not, we will have to learn to deal with the fact that the volcano is erupting. We'll have to learn to use the spaces that we have in the south of the country. We'll have to learn to deal with the ash that we have to deal with every now and then. There's an ash in, we don't want to have it, but it might happen. So we need to have systems in place to manage that. We have to start thinking of how do we utilize the material that's coming out from the volcano, the ash and all of that, in a positive way. There are ways you could do it. So we need to start thinking creatively of how we manage the spaces we have, because this volcano is going to erupt and keep on doing what it's doing for a little while. And even if it doesn't, when it goes back to sleep, we have to factor in the fact that it seems now to have entered a period where it's erupting more often. If you think of it, it used to erupt at least one explosive eruption every 100 years or so. We have now had, within the last 100 years, more than two explosive eruptions. So it's into a more active period. So therefore it means that you can't forget Soufriere if you ever did. And when we plan for the future development of St. Vincent, we have to plan for a future which factors in that we have an active volcano, we have a volcano that can erupt, and we now know what it can do. And therefore, we just have to manage our systems and put things in place so that we could manage it better. And I'm sure we can do that. We have done it with other things. It's just, this is another hazard we have to deal with and think creatively of how we deal with it.
Thank you very much, Professor Richard Robertson. As usual, it's so wonderful to have you. Thank you for all you do. And I always like to remind people that you are my sixth form classmate, so
of course,
I have some bragging rights. Thank you. Continue to do what you're doing. And Ms. Michelle Forbes as well, you have a hard task on your hand, but we wish you well and we know you're up to the task. Good luck, and thank you guys for coming this evening. This has been Roundtable Talk. We'll be back again next week, Wednesday at 6. Good evening.
Channel 114.
Children are the future, help them read, learn, grow. Early reading is the key, so help them read, learn, grow. Let's show them how much fun it is to read, learn, grow. So parents, you play a part. First and foremost, reading from so young is advantageous. Link with the teachers, working hand in hand is a must. Just 10 minutes of your child reading to you is a plus. Get fun books, make reading priority. When children read, they are able to learn, and the more they learn, the more they grow. So parents help the kids read, learn, grow. Reading is fun, kids have to know. Read, learn, grow. The children are the future, help them read, learn, grow. So parents, you play a part.
This message is brought to you by the OECS USAID Early Learners Program, funded by United States Agency for International Development. For more information, log on to www.oecs.org/ELP.
Fire and dice. Together on one scratch ticket can make your dreams come true. Yes, it's Fire and Dice. The new $10 scratch game with thousands of dollars to be won. Match your numbers with any of the winning numbers and win the prize shown up to $125,000. You can double or triple your prize with Fire and Dice. Available from all lotto agents and runners. There's cash to catch with just a scratch.
Erasmus Wiley, Glasgow, and I'm feeling perfectly fine. I just had the vaccine, and I'm trying to encourage each and everyone to come and get the vaccine. It's important. Life goes on, but with this vaccine, it makes it even easier. Because of the field we are in, we are actually at the front. So each taxi driver should come and take this vaccine, because trust me, it will be important to each and every one of us going forward.
Do not progress.